In the Far East, within the huge archipelago of Indonesia, there lies the strangest of islands. Halfway between the massive continents of Asia and Australia, it's studded with volcanoes and cloaked with jungle. These forests hide a community of creatures, many of which are found nowhere else, which have fascinated naturalists for more than a century. Over 100 years ago, Alfred Wallace, who, like his great contemporary Charles Darwin, was fascinated by the problem of the origin of species, sailed for Sulawesi, then called the Celebes. As he travelled, he discovered that there was a sharp boundary between Asian and Australian animals running north and south through Indonesia, a boundary that became known as Wallace's Line. But Sulawesi was a problem, because it contained animals with origins in both continents living side by side. Among those with connections with Asia were odd black monkeys and spectacular hornbills, while these strange birds and this bear-like marsupial are typical of Australia. Many of the animals he discovered were also unique. Sulawesi, it seemed, had been isolated from other land for so long that, like a mid-ocean island, its animals had evolved into new and peculiar forms. These fish, which hate to be in water, are rock blares, and Wallace was well familiar with them, for they occur all over the tropics. But inland, he found some very odd animals indeed. This is one of the most bizarre. Unique to Sulawesi, it's called the maleo. It belongs to a family known as megapodes, and to Wallace, worrying about the distribution of animals, it had a particular fascination.
They bury their eggs, you see, to incubate them. Yes, it is. Megapode? I don't understand it, Arnie. It's an Australian species, you see. It shouldn't be here at all. Now, calm down, Wallace. Facts. You need more facts.
And still today, naturalists are searching for facts to help unravel Wallace's puzzle, the mixture of animals on Sulawesi. But today's naturalists are not only interested in discovering animals and tracing their origins, but also in understanding their ways of life. For Sulawesi's wildlife is now more vulnerable than at any time during its long isolation. These maleos are a good example of how peculiar these island animals are. They have an apparently simple nesting behavior. Like a reptile, they just bury their eggs in the ground and then leave the developing chick to fend for itself. The egg must still be warmed, so maleos find sites where the soil is heated, either by the sun in a jungle clearing or by hot volcanic springs. The egg hole must be dug to 3 feet deep, to a level where the soil has a constant temperature of 36 degrees. Soil conditions like these are few, and so many maleos crowd onto each nesting site. As their numbers increase, the competition for space becomes intense. Finally, the digging territories are established and the maleos start excavating again in earnest. The male and female take it in turns to dig. Another very different creature also uses this place for its display. A male flying lizard displays the bright yellow flaps along its flanks. Usually these Asian lizards signal with their vividly coloured throat flag alone to establish territories or to attract a mate. But the species on Sulawesi also uses its side flaps. Bright orange is the female's colour. The flaps have another important function. They serve as wings. They travel from tree to tree in search of food, ants on the trunks and branches, but flying through the jungle has its dangers. A female wood spider has caught this flying lizard in its massive web. As it approaches to feed on the lizard's corpse, her passenger, the minute male, waits above her jaws to feed on any scraps which the giant female might leave. Wallace was particularly fascinated by the insects of Sulawesi. Little work has been done on them since, but today an international expedition of biologists have returned to find out more about them. Not surprisingly, the expedition has called itself Project Wallace, after the great naturalist. They are using many ingenious new techniques to study insects in all the areas of the jungle, and they're discovering not only new species, but also new facts about the roles insects play in the forest community. Sulawesi's butterflies are among the most spectacular in the world, and as with so many of the island's creatures, many are just slightly different from similar species elsewhere. Hundreds may congregate on the riverbanks searching for salts. Some have developed extraordinary wing shapes, like the green dragon-tail. This one, Bloom's swallowtail, Wallace described as being one of the most magnificent that he had ever seen. Many of the butterflies Wallace discovered came from relatively accessible areas on the island. Project Wallace is now searching for more in the remote areas deep in the rainforests. To do this requires specialized equipment, relatively large teams, and particularly the help of Indonesian guides who know the jungle and its hazards. Like the pit viper. It's well camouflaged on the forest floor, but if it's trodden on, it can give an agonizing and sometimes fatal bite. Not all the snakes are so dangerous. This is the reticulated python, which kills by squeezing. They are common. This particular specimen is a mere 4 feet long and hunts for jungle rats and birds. But some of Sulawesi's pythons are considerably larger. In fact, they are among the largest to be found anywhere. This one is 20 feet long, and some have been found that are longer than 30 feet. Occasionally, people have been killed by these snakes in Sulawesi, but their natural prey is usually monkeys or perhaps wild pigs on the forest floor. One of these pigs is very strange indeed. The babirusa. This shy and elusive animal is found only on Sulawesi and nearby islands. The male has prominent tusks, while the female has none. Both lack hair on their body. Very little is known about these pigs, but it's believed that the male's back-curling tusks protect its forehead during fighting. Equally peculiar is Sulawesi's dwarf buffalo, the anoa. It too is shy and poorly understood, and like so many other animals of the island, could soon be in danger of extinction. So today's search for facts about Sulawesi's creatures is not merely to satisfy curiosity. It's needed in order to produce plans to protect these animals in rapidly developing Indonesia. This protection has to involve an understanding of both natural and unnatural predators. The malleo's egg lying buried in the ground is very vulnerable to predation, so vulnerable that it could lead to the bird's extinction. There are the ancient egg stealers like the monitor lizard and the newly arrived ones like people and their dogs. So when the 3 feet deep hole is finally dug and the egg duly laid, there are plenty of other creatures around that will get it if they can before it hatches. The egg in place, the parents carefully fill in the hole. That is the last thing they can do to help their offspring. Down below, the egg should remain at a constant temperature through the midday sun and during the cool of the night. But from now on, the buried, developing chick is alone. A search for fresh eggs is a daily routine for the monitor lizard. People also seek the enormous eggs for food. But today, protection of nest sites has reduced this toll. Dogs and predators like the monitor lizard are much harder to control, and so the researchers are trying to find new ways to protect the unhatched malleos. For large scientific expeditions like Project Wallace, it's possible for scientists with their jungle support teams to stay deep in Sulawesi's forests for weeks at a time. From a forest camp, it's just a short stroll at dusk to see Sulawesi's strangest creature of the night. The spectral tarsier. It's a small primate, a relative of lemurs and monkeys, and it's become a specialist hunter. Using immense eyes and keen ears, the tarsier family works together to search out their insect prey. A second member of the family is having trouble with jungle mites, but now it too joins in the hunt. Family groups of spectral tarsiers spend the night travelling through their territories, voraciously feeding on insects on the forest floor or on low branches. Their grasping hands, characteristics of primates, and so like ours, are put to good use. As dawn approaches, they travel back to their nest holes and greet each other with long, high-pitched squeaks. These also let neighbouring tarsier families know the boundaries of this group's territory and give a firm warning that poaching will not be tolerated. The night before, while the tarsiers caught insects near the forest floor, some of Sulawesi's animals of the night were feeding high in the treetops. Now at dawn, a great variety of fruit bats have returned to roost for the day. This is Pallas's tube-nosed bat with its baby. The name is apt as it has a snorkel-like tube projecting from each nostril. We don't know why tube-nosed bats have these strange nostrils, nor the reason for the curious markings of Wallace's striped face bat. But possibly the strangest of the island's bats are these naked-backed bats. They have green fur, which probably helps their camouflage when roosting amongst palm leaves. It's not known how they produce green fur, but it's possible that, like South America's sloths, algae grow on their hair. Fruit eaters come to Sulawesi's treetops during the day as well. The most conspicuous are the Greater Celebes hornbills, perhaps the most colourful of all hornbills. Large flocks can feed in a single fruiting tree, carefully selecting the ripest and most tasty berries. More shy, but often feeding in the same tree, are the dwarf hornbills, which seem to be readily tolerated by their far larger cousins. The greater hornbills generally perch on sturdy branches and delicately pluck fruit from the same bough. But on occasions they're tempted by berries dangling so far out on the branch that they can only be reached while on the wing. And hornbills certainly can't hover. A second attempt. And this time it got it. At this time of the year, these great hornbills find their partners and start to look for a suitable nest hole in which to rear their young. Hornbills use natural tree holes for nests. The smaller fruit-eating grosbeak starlings are more active architects in a close-by tree. These starlings may look like many others of the family, but they have very strange habits. They bore numerous holes in a dead tree trunk in which they rear their chicks. They use the same tree year after year until eventually the rotten timber, weakened by the nest holes, collapses, and then the whole colony must find a new home. Nest predators are a major problem for the starlings and, to a lesser extent, the hornbills. The barred honey buzzard is a specialist nest robber and regularly watches the colony for an opportunity to raid it. But it has unsettled the hornbill. This time the honey buzzard holds its ground. There are some very strange creatures up here. Getting up to find out what they are was once thought to be virtually impossible, but today's naturalists are developing ways of doing so. Sulawesi's treetops are especially interesting, having a mixture of Australian and Asian animals feeding within them. A gripping tail is a great asset for the bear cuscus, a marsupial possum. Its ancestors must have come from Australia, but since then it has been isolated for so long on Sulawesi that it has become quite different from its relatives. Working often in groups, bear cuscus search for young leaves, which they select very carefully. This cuscus is the largest of all possums. In Sulawesi's jungle trees, it's the most specialized of all the leaf eaters, a role that would usually be filled by monkeys in Asian forests. There are some Asian monkeys in Sulawesi's treetops, the so-called black apes. These generally feed on fruit and so don't compete with the leaf-eating cuscus. But Project Wallace is now about to invade their treetop domain. They bare their teeth as a threatening gesture to the scientists below. Black apes are not true apes, even though they lack a tail, but are in fact monkeys which, like the cuscus, have evolved into a special form on Sulawesi. A more correct name for them is crested macaque. It's now believed that Sulawesi may have been formed by two islands, one from Asia and the other from Australia, coming together, moving in the same way as continents are now known to do. So this strange assortment of animals was brought together. The fogging machine is a latest gadget to help naturalists discover what insects live high up in the forest trees. It's hauled up into the branches as it belches a special smoke which temporarily stuns insects. Myriads of often tiny insects fall into the collecting trays. The majority are totally new to science. So Project Wallace is discovering hundreds of new species of insects and simultaneously gaining an understanding of their importance in the forest community. The scientists also search for special insects which could benefit us. Many jungle insects are predators and can be used to eat insect pests which devour our crops. The maleo and its huge egg could help us too, as a domestic bird. So it's a welcome sight at one maleo nesting area, which in the past has been much raided and which the team has had in their care, when a chick starts to emerge from the ground. As it struggles to be free of the earth, it meets a final threat. Hordes of tiny ants start to attack it. They can eat a maleo chick alive before it breaks free from the ground. Maleo chicks are so well developed when they emerge from the soil that they can look after themselves immediately, the result of having so much yolk to feed on while they're in the egg. New chicks are tagged so that their progress can be followed. This information will help in developing plans to ensure the survival of this extraordinary and possibly useful bird that lays such massive eggs. The scientists of Project Wallace and other researchers are continuing to make new discoveries, carrying on the tradition started 100 years ago by Alfred Wallace. He was the first to notice the now famous Wallace line between the wildlife of Australia and Asia. And now there are studies on insects for controlling pests, and also research on the maleo, the Anoa buffalo, and the Babirusa pig, which may lead to their domestication for our purposes. And there's surely much more to be discovered yet in this extraordinary place.